Cheers, everyone, and welcome back to our Sky Tonight program. This is Seth Mayo, curator of astronomy for the Lohmann Planetarium at MOAS. And in this edition of our program, we're covering the dates of October 31st through November 6th, 2022. We're going to make this a relatively simple episode by celebrating the Halloween sky and what it has to offer. So we're going to first just do a general tour of what we can see on Halloween night, and it provides a good look at what the month of November looks like when it comes to the star field and what stars and constellations are visible. And then we're going to look at some interesting Halloween-themed celestial objects that we can find around our sky right now. So let's get to it. If you happen to be out on Halloween night, or at least around that date, maybe trick-or-treating or spending time outside, I'd like to show you just a general view of the sky above and what it has to offer. And there's some bright objects you can take note of right now. I'll start with some beautifully bright solar system objects you've probably already noticed lately. The obvious one to look at on Halloween night is our moon that you find here. The moon will be at almost half full or first quarter phase, but technically on Halloween, it's a crescent moon. And I always love the crescent phases of the moon. I think it's when it's most prettiest in the sky. But of course, the moon is commonly associated with Halloween. So it's nice when it's out around this time of the year. Not far from the moon, you'll find the planet Saturn just east of it right there. Saturn looking like that non-twinkling star that's been up in the sky for some time. And in the early evening right now, it's in the south and southeast. If you have a telescope, of course, those rings are always amazing. Even more east of that, we can still see the really bright planet Jupiter that has been fairly close to us lately since it was at opposition not too long ago. And Jupiter really shines, looking like the brightest star you've ever seen, but of course it's the biggest planet in our solar system. So Jupiter really shines right now, which is great, and you can see it for a decent part of the night. Now, shifting to bright stars and constellations, let's head over to the southwest, where we're seeing some late summertime constellations set, especially one that's kind of left over from the summer. Right here are the stars of Sagittarius, still holding on in the southwestern part of the sky. If you are farther south, you have a better view of this. If you're farther north, it might be a little hard to see what I'm talking about here, but you might see some of it. What I always notice with these stars are the teapot looking shape, the asterism right here. There's the handle, the lid, and the spout. Of course, that is the main section of Sagittarius, the half-man, half-horse constellation from the zodiac, so you can still find that there. Looking higher above Sagittarius and now starting to shift to the west is another leftover summertime object, this time called the Summer Triangle, with these three bright stars right here that shine. This is Altair, 15 light years away. This is Vega, the fourth brightest star in our night sky, about 25 light years away. And you have Deneb here, that is not as bright, but a massive blue-white star, more than 2,500 light years away. And as you may know, each of these stars are part of some interesting constellations. Aquila the Eagle down here. Vega is part of Lyra the Harp, that tiny little constellation there. And Deneb, part of one of my favorite constellations that looks like a big cross right here in the sky. This is called Cygnus the Swan. So I love seeing Cygnus there. Always a treat, and still high up at this time of the year for the fall. Now, as we shift to the east where things rise from, we still have the great square of Pegasus near one of the wings of Cygnus. I'll draw Pegasus, the winged horse, of course. And connected to Pegasus, we have those fall constellations I mentioned in last week's episode. These are kind of the stars, pun intended, for the fall sky. Connected to Pegasus are the stars of Andromeda right here. And not far from Andromeda, someone she fell in love with, which is Perseus the warrior. He's a little bit lower in the sky. But most recognizable in this area is the W-shaped stars here of Cassiopeia that we find right there. And if we go directly north, we do of course have that North Star right here. And as you may know, the North Star is part of the Little Dipper right there. The little bear known as Ursa Minor. A lot of times when we talk about the dippers, people think of the Big Dipper, but here in Florida, or if you're in a southern latitude, the Big Dipper has now set in the evening, and so not a great time of year to see the Big Dipper. But if you're in more northern latitudes, you might still see the Big Dipper, because in some places the Big Dipper either barely sets or doesn't set if you're far enough north. So these are some of the great objects you can find right now in our sky for Halloween and for a good part of November as well, as we look forward to the rest of that month. You will notice, of course, these objects I mentioned will have shifted slightly west by the end of November, but you'll still generally see most of these. Maybe Sagittarius will be a little tough to see by then, but this is generally our November skies as well. Now, one of my favorite things to do at this time of year is find all of those Halloween-themed objects that are spread throughout our sky at this time of the year. Many of these are deep sky objects. And I've talked about these before, especially last year, but it's always fun to go back to these same places because they're just fascinating to talk about and look at. So we're going to head over to the north and northeast, where we're going to find something called the Ghost Nebula. And it turns out there's a lot of nebulae in the sky that have a ghost name attached to them because many of these objects kind of look like ghosts. So we're going to head over to one of the Ghost Nebula. This time, we're looking at something inside the constellation called Cepheus, which represents a king. To me, the constellation looks like a house turned upside down, but whatever. There is the picture there. He is the husband of Cassiopeia that we just mentioned, the queen that looks like a W in our fall sky. So as we zoom into the nebula, that's about 14 or 1500 light years away, what we're going to find is a really interesting glob of gas and dust. This is what's called a reflection nebula. So there are stars embedded inside of this that are shining pretty bright, and that light from those stars is reflecting off the nebula, creating a silhouette in space. And the silhouette is what we're seeing here. The general nebula itself kind of looks like a ghost or a ghostly veil, but more specifically, to the left here, where you see I'm circling, you have these two shapes that look like ghosts kind of sticking their arms into space. They really look very cool. So we have this one here, it's a little bit larger. You can see kind of a head here, some arms kind of sticking out there, and then you have a smaller one down here. So I love those shapes. They look like these ghosts kind of sticking out of the greater nebula and the reflecting light from the stars within. So I think that one's quite beautiful. Now, not far from this area is another nebula that also has a ghostly name. Sometimes it's also called the Ghost Nebula, but we do call it the Ghost of Cassiopeia, or IC63 is the more technical name. If we zoom into the W in that middle star, that's a star called Gamma Cassiopeiae or Gamma Cass. As we zoom in here, we're finding a nebula that's actually affected by this star. We'll zoom in here, and there we have the kind of ghostly veil of this nebula, again, sometimes called the Ghost Nebula itself. And what's happening here is that the star up here in Cassiopeia is shining quite bright. It's a blue-white star, very intense, very bright, like 65,000 times brighter than our sun, shining down on this nebula, and the ultraviolet radiation is exciting the hydrogen and ionizing it, and that lights it up. It emits light, and that's what you see where the red is there. Now, this image does not do this justice, and let's take a look at an image from the Hubble Space Telescope here of the same nebula, or a smaller portion of it, and it is quite beautiful, of course. You can see in the middle kind of the reddish material, that hydrogen that's being energized or ionized by the starlight of Gamma Cass. And then that blue dust and gas you see there is reflected starlight. So this is an emission nebula and a reflection nebula combined, creating this beautiful ghostly kind of appearance to it. So that's quite nice. And this is a little closer to us at about 550 light years away. All right, we're gonna zoom back out from there. We're gonna find another ghostly named nebula. This time we're gonna find something not in this area of the sky, but actually in the southern sky, or the southwest, near Sagittarius in this area, and actually near our galactic center in this area. We find a whole bunch of deep sky objects. There's another one we'll mention in just a moment in this area. But what we find here selected is what's called the Little Ghost Nebula. It sits inside a constellation called Ophiuchus, the serpent bearer that we find there, still lingering in the sky. And of course, we're going to zoom in about 3,500 light years away. It's actually anywhere between 2,000 and 5,000 light years. So it's not precisely pinned down the distance of this, but we know it's around that range. As we zoom in, we find another interesting nebula right there. Now, this is not the best picture, so let's look at another Hubble Space Telescope image of it, and here we go. Now, I guess this is supposed to look kind of ghostly, but it is a star that has died, so I guess that can relate to the ghost idea, right? And what you're finding here is something called a planetary nebula, a star similar in mass to our sun that died and then slowly, or at least more gently, expelled its gas into space. And what's left behind is the dead core of the star called a white dwarf. And that's what's in the center of this sort of ghostly orb in the sky. That white dwarf is radiating energy out and ionizing the gas around it, so we can see the oxygen and the hydrogen and the nitrogen atoms glowing in different colors, and we can see all of that in this really cool kind of expanded shell. So this shows us the death throes of stars that are similar in mass to our sun, that are less explosive than those supernova explosions that occur throughout our universe. So this kind of ghostly orb, the Little Ghost Nebula, is another great example of an object that can have that kind of Halloween theme to it, or at least you can kind of tie something to it, especially since it's a dying or already dead star. So we'll zoom back out from there, and not far from that location is another area of the sky that I did talk about in last week's episode, and it's quite amazing, and that's the Eagle Nebula. Now this sits about 6,500 light years away. And if you recall from last week's episode, we talked about the pillars of creation now captured by the James Webb Space Telescope. And if you haven't seen that picture already, it's absolutely stunning. The picture we had a chance to see is from what's called NIRCam, which is a near-infrared camera that sees in wavelengths of light that are a little bit longer than red light that our eyes can see. That's what's in the near-infrared. It reveals this huge cloud of gas and dust where stars are being born, and those clouds of gas and dust are also being lit by stars away from the nebula that are exciting the material around it. It's truly extraordinary and so beautiful. And I always say that the whole nebula kind of looks like giant claws, like a monster's claws sticking out into space. So there's that Halloween theme for you there. But let me show this to you in Worldwide Telescope. It's a great free program you can download, or you can just go to a web browser, and if you look up Worldwide Telescope, you can actually access this on any browser on your computer. It's really fun. So what we're looking at here are the pillars of creation kind of embedded onto the sky. So it shows you the background stars around it, and we can actually go back and forth between an older image of the nebula and then look at the James Webb Space Telescope image there. There are those giant claws you're seeing there. So again, this is the NIRCam image we saw recently, that was recently released by the James Webb Space Telescope. But let's look at another version of this image also released from the James Webb Space Telescope that's even newer, or at least the release of it happened much more recently, and that is the same image in mid-infrared wavelengths. We're going to get this from an instrument called MIRI. And the mid-infrared is even longer wavelengths, showing you even more details inside the clouds. And there's that image. Isn't that stunning? It looks even more monster-like, that hand or claw-like structure we find there of these great pillars of gas and dust. We can zoom in and really see the detail here of these pillars that can span many light years across. This is a big area of space. And in the mid-infrared wavelengths, it looks even more creepy and eerie. So I love that for this time of the year, and it's showing us even more details of this nebula, especially in the mid-infrared. So another great area of the sky relating to Halloween, and there's one more I'd like to show you. You have to stay up a little bit later to actually find the area where this is located, all right? But we're gonna move ahead in time a bit later so we can see Orion the Hunter, which is of course a winter constellation, and is really rising at the maybe 11 or even midnight time frame, or at least that's when it's high enough in the sky to see. And in this area, we can find Orion. You can see Orion's belt right there, his feet star, shoulder stars here. And his left foot, this star right here, is the brightest star in the constellation. It's called Rigel. And I don't even need to use the search function to find this. We can actually just zoom in here. And as we do so, Rigel is actually shining so bright. It's a really large blue-white star that's shining on this cloud of gas right here that is famously known as the Witch's Head Nebula. This is one of my favorite Halloween-themed objects in the sky because if you look at it the right way, it looks like a witch's head. You'll find the chin right here, like a mouth, and then a nose, and the rest of the head here. And in other pictures you can find online, you can see even more of that witch's head, the nose kind of sticking out, the mouth kind of where the eyes should be, and it really gives off that appearance. Again, another reflection nebula reflecting light from that star Rigel. And when dust reflects light, you see it commonly in the blue wavelengths because it's refracted in such a way where the blues kind of show through. and the other light is kind of scattered away, other colors, I mean. And so blue really kind of dominates. And it makes it even more eerie, having that kind of bluish kind of glow to it that you see. And combined with that shape provides the famous Witch's Head Nebula. So I love knowing that you can find this near one of the bright stars of Orion. And everything I mentioned to you, you need telescopes to see it, even large telescopes. But you can find these images online, and just kind of knowing they're in the sky out there, kind of floating in space, creating these kind of eerie, sort of fun, interesting environments is fun to think about at this time of the year. And maybe while you're trick-or-treating and spending some time outside, you can appreciate all of the universe has to offer and just take a moment to look up and enjoy it all. Hey, that's it for another edition of our Sky Tonight program. Thank you very much for tuning in. And if you happen to be in our area in Daytona Beach, please stop by the Museum of Arts and Sciences. We have a lot going on here. And if you want any more information of all of that, check out our website anytime, of course. And if you want to tune into our social media channels, we have many options that you can choose from. We're posting some great content from all around the museum. So hope to see you back here again. Of course, I got to say happy Halloween and definitely happy stargazing.